Hey y'all, I'm Melissa Guerra. I am the Kitchen Wrangler and welcome back to my podcast. This is number 7. I can't believe I've written 7 podcasts and there has been a learning curve. Like I'm figuring stuff out. But anyway, I haven't figured out everything because I'm still working from a very low-tech piece of paper. But today our subject matter is who invented noodles? And I always try to look at things from the perspective of someone who lives along the Texas border. We have a very specific cuisine, but it's neither here nor there. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly where is it from. So we have quite a few noodle dishes here that fideo is the big one that we enjoy here along the border. And so I wanted to kind of do a deep dive on noodles today. And one of the things that I'm learning while I'm writing my podcast is I need to give you 3 points for you to remember because I'm talking about our planet Earth. It's been around for 4.5 billion years. Humans, we've been around for 200,000 years. That's a lot of stuff to remember. It's a lot of stuff to remember. And so I'm going to try to stick to a 3-point rule in my podcast so I can give you 3 points to remember. Now, when I give you these 3 points, you're going to be like, these are completely unrelated, but just hang in there. If you watch the whole podcast, hopefully you will get my drift. I mean, I am going to get somewhere at some point. And I have my little PowerPoint. Here we go. Who invented noodles? Now, these 2 photos show who might have invented noodles. We've got spaghetti, and then we have a bowl of Chinese, like a Chinese soup with noodles. So the rumor is it was either the Chinese or the Italians. And you might think, well, obviously the Italians, because wheat came from the Fertile Crescent. We love noodles that are made out of wheat, and the Italians have all those great pastas. But then you think about the long history of China and Chinese food history, and you think, well, maybe it was the Chinese. And then you have the word noodle, which is actually a German word. The word noodle is German. So maybe the Germans had something to do with the invention of noodles. So there's a lot to talk about. So let's kind of get into this deep dive about the invention of noodles. And at some point I need to get beyond this piece of paper because it's kind of hanging me up. I need to get some advancement in my technology. And if you are enjoying my rambling, then please subscribe. I have about 25 followers right now for my food history YouTube channel. I appreciate every single one of you all because you are listening to me experiment with my food history writing. I'm really, really grateful for your patience. You have way more patience than I do. Goodness, it's frustrating, but I really am enjoying the writing. I'm enjoying the research. So thank you for joining me on this journey. So, let's get to our next slide. So, yes, I had a point about this. This is schnitzel with noodles. We all learned, thank you, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Sound of Music. We're singing about schnitzel with noodles. We know that the Germans have a real affinity. Well, the Austrians. Sorry, I get y'all mixed up all the time. Y'all are so close. Y'all are just right next door. There's a real affinity for schnitzel with noodles. So I think that there is some confusion as to where noodles come from. But for the purpose of this podcast today, we are just going to talk about 2 types of noodles. And that would be noodles made out of wheat or noodles made out of rice. Now, the one clear-cut thing that I can say about all noodles, globally speaking, 360 noodle information here, is that noodles are made out of grain. Every noodle that you have ever seen, zoodles. I correct myself. I have seen those zoodle things, but those are a later invention. Y'all know what I mean. You have my drift. You have my noodle drift. We are not talking about zoodles, the noodles that are made out of zucchini. Get over those. We're not talking about those. We're talking about real old-fashioned OG noodles. So there is a mystery of where noodles come from, but we all know that they're always made from grain from some type of grain. But the two noodles that we're going to focus on are noodles that are made out of wheat and noodles that are made out of rice. So here are my 3 points that I want to give you. Oh, let's see if this works in my PowerPoint, because I never know. I mean, technology has got me whooped. I'm going to give it a shot here. Here are the 3 points. Oh, fiddle-dee-dee. This was supposed to be animated, but whatever, we'll live. All right, here are my 3 points. 1, all grains are grass seed heads. Okay, I know this point may sound random, but just hang on to it because it is very important. All grains, so we're talking barley, we're talking oats, we're talking corn, we're talking wheat, we're talking rice, we're talking they're all seed heads. That is a grain. Point number 2, humans cannot eat grass seed heads. We cannot. I'll get more into that later. So you got to remember that second point. And 3rd, wet dough can be baked or boiled or dehydrated and boiled later. You know, this is sounding like Jeopardy. You'd be like, wow, the answers are coming in forms of questions. So many questions. Don't leave me. Hang in there. I'm going to get somewhere with this. I wish I could offer you a cookie or a glass of tea so you'd hang around a little bit longer. But anyway, get your own cookie, get your own tea, and buckle up because this is going to be good. All right, so let's talk about grains as a seed head. Now, I know I said I was going to talk just about rice and wheat, but I want you to look at corn. Sorry, corn. We're not talking about you today. Usually I would talk about corn. But check this out. That is a primordial corn. We have domesticated plants, but at some point they were wild. They were feral, just like those cats that are out in the barn. At some point they were domesticated and then they went just crazy and went wild. Every plant that ever existed on the planet just popped up on its own before humans were here. Now, some may have appeared because of natural selections. The birds might have eaten them. The kangaroos might have eaten them. Something may have eaten them, and then it started to morph into a different plant. But when humans came around and they started to cultivate plants, then plants really changed. But this is corn. This is the original corn before humans got a hold of it. Sometimes you can find these primordial corns. And what does it look like? It looks like a grass. Corn in its original form, which is called teosinte, look like grass. Let's see, what's my next slide? These are the original versions of wheat and corn. So the Triticum turgidum, voices in my head can pronounce that way better than I can. That is the primordial corn. That is the first corn that is, wheat. That is the first wheat. It is wild wheat. And there is evidence of this type of wheat 10,500 years before the estimated time of Christ's birth. Pretty cool. And then on the other side, we have rice. Again, that looks like a weed or a grass that my husband mows over in the yard. Oryza sativa. And there's evidence of that 12,000 years before the estimated birth of Christ as well. So you can see that both of these grains come from a grass, and they are the seed head on grass. So what I'm trying to say is that all pasta, all noodles are essentially made from grass, and more specifically, the seed heads on grass. So here's a big world map. I love this map. And again, I've told you, when I'm rich and famous, I'm going to draw my own map, because I stole this one off the internet, but they don't know where I am. So maybe, well, anyway, I'm going to get myself in trouble. But you can see where these grasses grew wild in the world. So you have millet, you have rice in Asia. Millet is, goodness gracious, where is that? Is that Australia? I think that is. Then we've got buckwheat in Africa, wheat around the Mediterranean, the Fertile Crescent. I talk about that all the time, the Fertile Crescent. And corn is of the Americas. So these are where these grasses grew. And the people that found them, I think they would watch animals to see if animals would eat them. And then they would go back and collect these seed heads off of the grasses, and they knew that they could eat them because the animals ate them. So once they figured out that these seed heads were edible, then they had to figure out how to make them edible for humans. And so, how long ago are we talking about? So I know we showed evidence of the wild wheat and the wild rice about 10 to 12,000 years before the birth of Christ. But rice, the first archaeological finding of rice was about 8,000 years. So it took about 2,000 years from the finding of this wild wheat to when they started, when archaeologists started finding wheat or rice being cultivated. And what being cultivated means is it went from its wild form to a form that humans intervened and they were planting it actively. So that took about 2,000 years. Now, when plants, seed heads, wheat, rice, corn, buckwheat, millet, when those started being cultivated and farmed, that was a huge leap forward for humankind because you didn't have to hunt and gather anymore. You didn't have to go throw a spear at an antelope. You could stay on the farm and raise your babies in peace, and you knew that you were probably going to survive for a couple of generations. So that was a huge thing for humanity. All right, so let's get to my second point, which was humans can't eat grass seed heads. Generally, I don't eat grass. I don't do anything with grass other than cut it. I have my husband cut it. Let's be honest. I have my husband cut it, and we get rid of the clippings, and that's all we do with grass. But before people had lawns and houses, and when they were wandering around, they could collect these seed heads. But if you've noticed, we don't have a face powerful enough, we being humans, we don't have a face powerful enough to chew up those grains. They're very, very hard. Now, I live on the ranch, and so the first thing that I think of, an animal that has really strong teeth, is a horse. This horse needs to brush a little bit more. But there are animals that I think the early humans would have followed around to see what grains were edible. Now, horses were made specifically to consume grains. Now, this is a jaw of a horse. And you can see that the molars, there are many, many more molars. They're much, much better for grinding. And another thing is that on our cars, I'm sorry, I sound like I'm jumping around all over the place. I am. When your car, the tire goes flat, you need to fill it up with air, and it says, the air pressure in there needs to be around 35 PSI. And PSI, what that stands for is pounds per square inch. So it's around 35 pounds. Now, your human jaw can exert about 160 PSI. So your face is about 4 times as powerful as the pressure in a car tire, which I thought was very interesting. But horses, the PSI that a horse can exert on a kernel of grain is 500 PSI. Ooh, let me see if I have the next one. Let me see if I have this other one. Oh, no, I don't. Rats. I thought I was going to put in a photo of a hyena. A hyena has like 1,100 PSI power in their jaws. They have these really incredible, very strong mandibles, and they can rip up meat. But if you were a herbivore, if you were eating seed heads, if you're going to survive on those, you needed a really, really powerful jaw. And humans, we just don't have it. We have a nice brain, or some of us do. I mean, I'm not going to count myself in that class, but we do not have the most powerful jaws in the world. And I've got another story about powerful jaws in another podcast. I'm going to noting that. Okay, great. So there were 2 ways that humankind figured out how to eat these seed heads that they couldn't eat. And that was by grinding them up. Now, this is a mortar and pestle. And I'm sure if you've watched my cooking channel, which you need to subscribe to now, don't leave this podcast, but after this one, go back and subscribe to my cooking show on YouTube. This mortar and pestle is Chinese. I can't remember how old it is. It's about 3,000 or 4,000 years old. But a mortar and pestle, which is basically just 2 rocks pounding together, that is how early humankind figured out that they could make these grains, these seed heads that they did not have the power in their face to consume. That is how they made them consumable. They smash them. They smashed them to smithereens between two rocks, and they pulverized them, and they put some PSI on those seed heads and made them into powder. So there were the two ways that humankind figured out how to access the nutrition in grains. One, they could boil the grains into a mush or a cereal, or they could grind the grains into a powder using a mortar and pestle. So you could do both. You could boil the grain and then smash it up, or you could smash it up and then boil it. You had options. You could do different stuff. Or you could grind these grains into a paste or into a flour, and you could save it for later, because that's a lot of work. I mean, first of all, growing a crop takes months, and then you have to do all that prep work with, bashing up in the grains and making the flour. That all takes a lot of time. If you're hungry, it's nice to have the food already ready. And so we get to my third point. I told you I was going to get there. I told you that this is why they pay me the big money, folks, because I'm bringing it home. I'm bringing home my final point. Is that once you get the grains into a powdered form and you add water, then that is a dough. So most doughs we think of, I don't know if you think about it being a dough being essentially powdered grass seeds mixed with water. That is essentially what all doughs, I'm having a moment. Doughs, is that plural? Dough. All dough is powdered grass seed mixed with water. Now, when you mix that with water, what it does is it makes the energy, the nutrition available to humans, but it also makes it available to bacteria and yeast spores, and mold can grow on it, and you don't want that if you want to eat this powdered grass seed later. So what you could do is you could dehydrate it. And so wet dough can be baked or boiled at first, or you could dehydrate it and bake it and boil it later. Sounds like I'm really getting out into the weeds, into the grasses, way out into the grasses, but just hang on. We need to get back to who invented noodles. Well, once these grasses were domesticated, the seed heads were harvested, the seed head grains were ground up, pulverized, and made into a paste. That was a lot of work. You had to plan your time for the harvest and the processing of the grains. And then once you mix your grain powder with water to turn it into a dough, the dough can spoil. Moisture attracts mold and yeast because it wants to eat the carbs. So what are we going to do? We're going to dehydrate that paste. Oh, I need to move okay. Oh. So if you want to dehydrate that paste, now with a paste, you can make an unleavened bread. We're not talking about yeast. I'm just not going there. That's a whole different deal. Don't think about regular bread that's leavened. We're just thinking about unleavened bread. And isn't this interesting? I've got unleavened matzah, which is a Jewish bread on one side, and I've got flour tortillas on the other. Do they look at all different? They do not. They are both unleavened breads. I hear ya. I hear all y'all. I hear your thoughts, you 25 followers. I hear your thoughts. I don't use baking powder in my flour tortillas. Not for any other reason than I really don't think I need it, and I don't really like it. I can make very bubbly, very light flour tortillas without any type of leavening, without any yeast, any baking powder, baking soda, anything. I can do it. And it's the same with matzah. That is an unleavened bread as well. So the first doughs that were made into a paste were then made into a little slab or a little round, and then they were baked, and that was an unleavened bread. So if we're going to take out the moisture, but these are wheat breads. Let me go to this next one. Oh, there's my tortillas again. I love taking photos. So it's like pictures of my kids. You're going to see more photos of my tortillas. These are actually unleavened breads made of rice, because those other ones, flour tortillas, we call it flour. It is flour, but we never use the word wheat. That is wheat flour. But these are rice flour, and these are from India. We have a bakri on one side, and I think the spelling went kind of weird on this one. This is it's a roti. It's a type of roti, but anyway, I apologize. The spelling kind of mixed up. What is it called? Choka ni rotli. We're missing an L in there. Achokanirotli, and these are unleavened rice breads. So there's no leavening in them. So once you flattened out your flat bread dough, it didn't take if you wanted to dry out this dough so that you could use it later, when you dehydrate something, all of the moisture leaves the surface of whatever you're dehydrating. If you're dehydrating, meat or fruit or vegetables, or you're making a mummy, whatever you're dehydrating, the moisture leaves the surface. And so the more surface you create, the faster, more efficiently, and more completely your dough can dehydrate. So you could have taken a flatbread such as this and cut it into ribbons so that it would dehydrate more efficiently. So we have rice noodles here and wheat noodles. So from those original flatbreads, because a noodle is basically an unleavened dough, just like our tortillas that we were looking at. And well, those are rice flatbreads, and there's my beautiful tortilla. That is a wheat flatbread, unleavened rice. And this is unleavened dough. Noodles are unleavened dough. So I still haven't answered your question. I'm almost there. Just hang in there. So it didn't take very long to get from these flatbreads to making ribbons out of the dough in order to make them dehydrate and dry up more quickly. So noodles, you might think of it as an ingredient, but it's really more of a technique. It is more of a technique to preserve a paste, a dough long term. Because if you have you can make a dumpling out of dough, like a chicken and dumplings. You just throw a blob into some boiling chicken broth and it preserves it. But that lump is not going to preserve very long. Like, you can eat it, you're good, it fills your tummy, that's great, but you can't preserve it for a month. If you roll it out thin and you dehydrate it completely, you can hang on to those things almost a year. And in times of famine, that would have been a miracle. Okay, and I've still not answered your question. But I'm getting close. Okay. Look at this. Behold. The oldest archaeological evidence of noodles is in this bowl, and this was found in northern China, and it is dated to about 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. So about 6,000 years ago. So those are some freakishly old noodles. I mean, we're talking about noodles in terms of being a preservation technique. These are 6,000 freaking years old. It totally worked. I would say it's a great technique for preserving food stuff. Those are some seriously, seriously old noodles. So the answer to my really long-winded question is because since we have found these really old noodles in China, the Chinese get the credit for inventing noodles. Now, eventually this technique went wherever grains existed. I don't think noodle techniques really worked in the Americas. We make tortillas here, we make a bunch of different stuff, but it doesn't really work with making corn noodles. You can do a lot of other stuff with corn, but nonetheless, there wasn't a lot of contact from the old world, from Eurasia, from Asia, from the Mediterranean. There wasn't a lot of contact that we know of from the old world, from Africa into the Americas. So this noodle technique kind of stops right at the Atlantic. It just didn't really cross over. But the interesting thing about these noodles, I told you we were just going to limit ourselves to wheat and rice. These noodles are made out of millet. Is that not a mind blower? Is that not a mind blower? Because millet, if we go back to this, I don't want to leave this slide. I love this slide. I'm not leaving this slide. But you remember where I was showing you where millet was from around Australia? How did these folks get millet? How did they get millet? They had this technique for making noodles down. But this was from a grave, and these noodles were supposed to accompany the person who was probably mummified, dehydrated as well. They weren't made into a noodle, but anyway. I'm sorry, I'm riffing. How did that millet get to the land of rice? there's a lot of exchange. And, there are a lot of different grains that would preserve and hold over through times of famine. So the more food, the more better. So anyway, so they were growing millet in China, it seems, way back when. And so that meant trade. So I think this is where you kind of get into like the guessing game. If you don't have early evidence of noodles, then it's hard to say who did what. But this is the earliest. So, and what I mean by that is, how did the technique travel from China to the Mediterranean, to the Fertile Crescent, to where they had wheat? We don't really know. But you can start seeing evidence of noodles in Europe. That's a close-up of those noodles, those little millet noodles. I know they look kind of gross, but they're 6,000 years old. I mean, what do you think? If I was 6, I don't even look good at the age I am. I mean, anyway, I think they look pretty good. But this photo didn't turn out that great. This guy's eating noodles. This is a Flemish portrait around the 1600s, and he is eating noodles. So Europe was, this is around the time when the Germans and Austrians were enjoying their schnitzel with noodles as well. So noodles became an old world traditional technique for preserving those plant-based doughs that came from grass seed heads. So China, y'all win. You win this one. You win because of your 6,000-year-old noodles. Okay, shoo. All right, I got through all 3 of my points. I hope y'all understood that. Now make sure you subscribe to my podcast where I just nerd out once a week on the food history that I really, really love. And I'm going to try to limit it to these 3 points. Let me go over the 3 points again. Grain is a grass seed head. I'm sure you remember that now. Humans cannot eat grass seed heads because we do not have enough PSI in our molars. And 3, wet dough can be baked or boiled, or dehydrated and baked and boiled later. So we got all our 3 points in. You got your answer. Now, make sure you subscribe, 25 of you. Well, you already subscribed, but send this nerdy podcast to your buddies that like food history. Or if they don't like food history, tell them to subscribe to my cooking channel, because there's less brainy stuff, more chowing down, which I'm in the mood for most days anyway. But thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this journey, this noodle journey, as much as I did. And tune in next Tuesday when I share another one of my what is it? It's not a discovery. It's more of an exploration. I'm exploring the food history subjects that I find fascinating. I'm Melissa Guerra. I'm the Kitchen Wrangler, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here on the podcast next week. Bye now.